I'm Sally Smith, Executive Director of the Alabama Association of School Boards, and joining me for this discussion are Andy Craig from the Alabama Department of Education and Perry Taylor, also from the Department of Education. Andy, as many of you know, is a Deputy State Superintendent of Education. Finance is his thing, and Perry is the Chief School Architect. So construction, bond issues, and other things is in his bailiwick, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Alabama has the first bond issue for public schools in about 13 years, I think. It's been a while. So there are a lot of new superintendents and board members out there who haven't gone through the process of working with the public school and college authority about securing those funds and being able to spend those funds. So we're going to go through some basic questions on how that's done. And first off, Andy, can you give us a little bit of background on the bond issue? We have sent out to each school system how much they have received in allocations, but give us the kind of the backstory of how that amount came about and what that means to them.
Sure. So the total bond issue is $1.25 billion. The first thing in terms of allocation is to split it between higher ed and K-12. So that's done by the traditional split percentages that we're used to seeing here. So that left about probably $912 million, I think, for K-12. So the allocation to K-12 is really three components. The first component is every system, regardless of size, gets $400,000 off the top. And then the last two components divided by two, so you got roughly 420 some odd million of each tranche left over after everyone gets 400,000. The first of that is just strictly by enrollment, so it's just prorated share based on your enrollment. The second piece of that is based on your prorated share as a school system for your public school fund allocation. So that kind of works in that equity component of value of the mills between districts. It kind of evens that out. So if you have a lower value of a mill per student than another system, then you would get more in that part of the allocation than the other system. So, but those are the three components. Again, probably 920 some odd million goes out to local schools. The bond, when will it be available? The bonds were sold on the 22nd of October, and Perry told me this morning that they are officially closed on the transaction, so everything's ready to go. The money's available, and we're ready to go.
Well, that's exciting news. And just to backtrack a little, the legislature's thought in giving every school system at least $400,000 was the idea that if you just allocated it on a per capita basis, it might not be enough for a sufficient project. Is that more or less the thinking behind that?
I think so. You know, a lot of those type costs are fixed, and so a smaller system, you know, in just the traditional by enrollment probably wouldn't get enough to do much capital at all. So it's, I think that was, and I think it was more. I think in the historically, I think that number was 200,000 maybe, Perry. Yeah. So they increased it to 400. So small systems, you know, the systems between 700 or 1,500 would get a significant enough portion to do something with.
All right, so that's exciting. That sounds like the money is close to being available. So Perry, question?
It is there, and systems are already submitting letters. The process, if you would like me to kind of go through it a little bit, is, and of course all systems have already been notified as to the process. And it's the same process that we've had since '98. So hopefully, well, that's a long time ago.
You and I may remember that, but I'm not sure other folks.
As far as the process, it really has not changed. The main thing that's changed has been the use of the funds, and we'll talk about that a little bit because I think there's some questions there about that. But basically, the money is in the state treasurer's office. It's sitting there, ready to be used. The main difference in a low locally funded project and a PSCA project is that the money stays in Montgomery or is invested, so the local school systems never receive their money, and this has been a struggle for some because they can't enter it, you know what I mean, in the checkbook. So, you know, you have to remember, I don't get my money and I don't pay my bills because that's all maintained and handled by the Division of Construction Management by law, which was the old building commission. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, many of our systems have done leverage funds over the last 20 years, and it's the same process with that. So the process is not different. The main thing is that we have got to think permanent on this bond issue. And I say that by in the past, and I went back and looked at 98 and 07 and this one, and the wording of what is a capital improvement is pretty much the same all the way through. Okay. Except for the fact that in this bond issue, they pretty much kicked out furnishings and computers and went more to the what we would call the tangible fixed items that become a permanent part of the building.
Can you use it to support another construction or help supplement another construction project you have going on?
Yes, you can have a locally funded project going on, and many systems are, I would call them shovel ready. In other words, they've already got the drawings done, they paid that out of local funds. And so, you know, they're ready to crank up. Many of them went ahead and started because the PSCA dollars were not going to be enough money to do the whole project, and they had local funds. So you go ahead and start, and now these PSCA funds come in, so you can modify that locally funded project and bring in the PSCA and let the PSCA then start paying, paying out. So you can mix the funds together. You can mix it with your leverage dollars. If you've got, I don't know how many systems have leverage projects going on, but those funds will be paid out first so that we go ahead and clean out those projects and then pick up with the new PSCA. So.
Okay.
So just one clarification to that I know I've gotten several questions on in those projects that started before the availability of the bond issue. You can't go back and reimburse yourself, but you can go forward and pay out, but you cannot go backwards.
Okay, that's a great point.
Yeah, don't write a check and expect to get reimbursed.
All right, that good pointer on that one.
A local check.
And as you said, the other payments are going to be coming from the state side. So.
That's right. So back to the beginning, you don't get your money and you don't pay your bills, but you do have to provide the Division of Construction Management with all, just like you would do at the local level, except you bundle it up and you send it to the Division of Construction Management. They in turn process it and send it to the comptroller and to the debt management. They all review it, and eventually the comptroller pays the vendor, pays the architect, pays the contractor, pays the materials, all those type of things. So everything is done on behalf of the local Board of Education.
Some school systems have already applied for the funds. For those who haven't, you mentioned sending in the letter. So how do you get the process started? How do you outline what your project is?
Okay. We have already sent them instructions as to how to access their money. And so basically it's a very simple. The local superintendent sends me a letter. He says, Perry, I would like $400,000 of my 2020-167 bond issue funds to be allocated to a roofing project for KBG Elementary School. And so then what we will do is we will allocate, set aside that 400,000, put it in a project, assign it a PSCA number, and then we distribute that back to them. They know their number. We then send it to the Division of Construction Manager, who by law is the administrator of this program. And so they have that number, and the local has that number, and then the local proceeds just like a locally funded project. They hire an architect, they send their plans in to me, they send them into the Building Commission, to the Division of Construction Management. The review process is all the same.
All right, any deadlines we need to be aware of? Do you have to spend the money by a certain date or get allocated by a certain date?
Generally, we say that's 3 year, once spent in 3 years. I think it's real important as we approach that 3 year timeline to have your funds obligated or under contract. But the technical deadline is 3 years. I want to go back, Si, if I could, just as far as what you can spend the money on. There is a narrow window that the money can be spent on for debt service. But that was, if you didn't pre-apply, the Department of Finance, when they're preparing to sell the bonds, they polled school systems, the ones that wanted to use that to pay off debt or pay off a portion of existing debt. So if you didn't apply, it's, at least for now, it's probably too late, because essentially they had to issue a different type of bond from the state level to accommodate systems that wanted to use it for debt service. So as of now,
That's locked.
those ones that applied, have plans to do that. But
So there were 10 systems that chose to use.
a lot of times what happens over that 3 year period would be, if you sent Perry a letter and encumbered 400,000 in his example, and you started another project and encumbered, more of your balance, and projects finish or projects, you don't necessarily spend all of what you encumbered. So at some point you got to kind of figure out your balances that are on existing projects, and a lot of times they'll get pulled together in some of the latter years of availability of the money. So you got to keep up with it. You got to keep up with, what part of your balance you've encumbered. And then if you hadn't spent all that and the project's complete, you need to be sure not forget about that balance, because it's certainly still usable and still available, but you're going to have to send Perry a letter saying, I want to reallocate that unspent balance over here.
Said the hurricane has brought the hurricanes that impacted the state, what that's done to the construction and building process. I'm hearing that costs are pretty high. Have you noticed anything?
We have an issue with materials.
Mm-hmm.
That's, of course, the housing market is booming now. We have a lot of materials that we need that are sitting in Mobile on the docks because of manpower shortage, because of the virus. I've been running into this quite a bit. We can't get this, and then and that's the reason so many are shovel ready. It's because they know that there's if a slew of systems. Like I said, we just started Friday, I think, and we've already got 35 systems that already want their project set up, ready to go. You're going to have a massive influx of needs. You're also going to have a limited supply of contractors, because we've been through this before. We went through it back in 2008 and 2009. You remember when things were difficult. It takes a while for construction companies to build their team back up, and of course they're hesitant, to not move too quickly and bring on new people or bring back the old people. So yes, it's going, it's definitely going. And I've told quite a few, sit back a while. You got 3 years, don't think that you're going to lose your money or run out of money or get behind. Maybe let some of these kind of get in place and then you start yours.
Any other advice you would give to school boards and school officials as they consider this project?
I would just encourage superintendents, local boards, whatever. And this is delicate for me as an architect, but when you're interviewing architects and engineers to do your projects, again, be sure they've done a school project before. Be sure that they have dealt with the Division of Construction Management, rather than.
You'll save yourself a little bit of grief if you do.
Yes, yes.
Do that.
And, I was looking the other day, we've probably got 20 to 25 architectural firms that do probably 70% of the school work, in the state. I mean, they gear to that type work. And so you are way ahead of the game, if you work with firms that have already been through the ropes, how to do things. So I think that's critical.
In all things we do our due diligence. Andy, any advice from you, and particularly since you also, not only were your local superintendent, but you have a CSFO background too. So any special words of wisdom or advice out there?
Well, when we were talking to superintendents recently about the process, I was telling them that I had this real sophisticated, high-tech way of keeping up with my balance. And it basically was...
You never knew what you balance.
I called you after I called Perry, but the sophisticated system was a vanilla folder that every time I sent Perry a letter, I wrote my balance on the outside of the folder. When I sent him a letter, I subtracted what I sent him. Just kind of kept a running total. But they probably have a lot more high tech, efficient ways to do that now. But it worked, and it certainly still works to do. Just got to stay on top of it. As Perry said numerous times, the state's not sending you money; they're paying your bills on your behalf. So all to keep up with it, all those transactions have to be recorded when you get the remittance advices. So it becomes revenue to the district when the state pays your bill on your behalf. So there's a lot of stuff you want to keep up with it. You certainly don't want balances to lapse. So you just need to stay on top of it throughout.